Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mesa City Council study session for May the 16th. I know Councilmember Finter is joining us by phone for our meeting that follows this one. Mr. Finter, are you on the phone for this meeting as well? Doesn't sound like it. So we'll look forward to Mr. Finter joining us for the meeting upstairs. The first item on our agenda is to review the agenda for tonight's council meeting. So if you could please take a look at that. We do have an award to give out. Mr. Luna will help us present some awards to the Mesa Public Schools Science Fair winners. So that'll be at the top of the agenda. Item 3 are various liquor license applications. 4 is various purchase contracts. Yes, Mr. Richards.
I just wanted to make a quick comment about how excited I am to see 4I coming forward. It's the pathway that connects to Tempe, I guess, is for lack of a better place to describe. But it goes from underneath the 101 freeway to Riverview Park and Dobson Road. And I've had a lot of residents asking about it. It'll form a bicycle connection all the way to Tempe Town Lake. So I think it'll be really exciting to get that project going. A lot of people are excited to see it get going, and so I just wanted to flag that we have that on the agenda tonight. Very exciting. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, very, very much worth noting. Agenda item 5 are various resolutions. 6 are setting some hearings on June the 6th. And 7 is introducing an ordinance. 8 is receiving public comment. And then we do have 9 is subdivision plats. We do have a few items off the consent agenda relative to conducting some public hearings. The first public hearing we have has to do with the Town Center Assessment District. And then hearings regarding the utility rates and the 5-year capital improvement program. So we'll conduct those public hearings upstairs. Council, do we need to take anything off the consent agenda other than those hearings that we just talked about? All right, thanks. Next item on our agenda for this meeting, item 2, is to hear a presentation and provide direction on the recent HUD decision to defund approximately 50% of Tier 2 housing programs across the United States, including the House of Refuge East Valley Transitional Housing Program. Natalie, thank you for joining us. Please help us know a little bit more about what's going on here.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the Council. On May 2nd, the Maricopa Association of Governments, MAG, Continuum of Care, received news from HUD that the Tier 2 awards had been announced. And basically what they said is that across the country, as you just said, Mayor, transitional housing for families, about 50% of it was either defunded or severely cut back. HUD, just regionally and nationally, is focusing more on what they call permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing. And it's very similar to what we use with our VASH voucher program for the veterans and the housing of the veterans, where you get them into housing and then you provide the supportive services to help them. The decision by HUD to focus more in those areas versus transitional housing wasn't a huge surprise to the region. It was the way they went about it that became very troublesome. And basically what they did is they defunded about 8 programs here in the Valley. One of them happens to be located in Mesa. It was part of the Williams Air Force Base, and at the time when that shut down, there was property that was deeded for this particular purpose. It's a regional facility. Today it houses 77 families. 91 of them are adults. 165 of them are children. They happen to have even a worse situation in that their contract with HUD expired as of February 1st. So what they have been doing is floating for the last 4 months these funds, waiting for them to come in. And now that they have found out that they are defunded and retroactively as of February 1st, they're in a very difficult situation. With us in the audience today, and if the council wants to hear from them, is Nancy Marion, who is the executive director for House of Refuge. And she's joined by Charles Sullivan, who is with the Arizona Behavioral Corporation, which is the funding element for House of Refuge. So just today, this afternoon, I was down in Phoenix along with these two individuals, and there was an emergency meeting for the continuum of care. And they're basically going to do a couple of different things from a regional perspective. They want to very immediately create a board statement that focuses HUD and talks about this crisis that we have here in the Valley and in Mesa in particular, and the impact of this retroactivity has on us and House of Refuge. And at a minimum, they are going to demand that there's some kind of a reasonable plan for transitioning these families into alternative housing. The second thing they want to do is create a strategy team, and they're going to be bringing at least 4, maybe 8 of the agencies that are more that are impacted here locally, along with other funding agencies, to the table to start talking very quickly about what are some reasonable actions that we can take, and let's focus again on the crisis at hand and really figure out where that need is and what little small available resources that we can cull and bring together as a region and to get to those families so that we can get them into some new housing for some kind of period of time. So those are the two things that as a region that we're going to be doing, and you will hear more about. Later, and there was a lot of conversation at this meeting, that there's going to need to be an ongoing discussion about how these cuts now impact the bigger system, and it's been really clear that HUD is also going to make additional cuts in the future. So after we get through the short-term crisis, we have to continue planning forward so that we're positioned better in the future for any moves or changes that come down the pike from HUD in the future. So what can the City of Mesa do at this point? They're actively going to be looking to the region and asking for any small pots of funding, anything that anybody can do. One person kind of said it in some respects kind of feels like taking a cup of water and throwing it on a house fire. But if we can get enough cups of water that turn into buckets that really kind of help and that can really fit this, that in the end, maybe this could be a good intervention to work on this crisis. For us, what we have done internally is looked at what could be available. And again, this is all based on what the council wants to do with these dollars and these funds. But what we would recommend is we take these funds and work within the regional context to figure out the best fit for these dollars. But we do have $60,000 that we can set aside from human service funding this year that we haven't used yet. This is funding that was set aside to use for staffing to oversee and manage the human service programs. We were able to kind of creatively and figure out a way to just cut that funding and provide $60,000 towards something in the region for this purpose. The second pot of dollars, and it's been mentioned by a couple of council members, is the $50,000 of additional human service funding that's been appropriated this year. And then a third pot of dollars is that the City of Mesa also had emergency shelter funds, and it's about $44,500 that was dedicated to rapid rehousing this year. And we took those dollars and we split it between two of our great partners, Save the Family and A New Leaf. And so if it was the council's desire, we could, dedicate those dollars, those rapid housing dollars, to these residents. Now, one contingency or one caveat that you have to remember is that a lot of these residents are chronically homeless, and rapid rehousing is not meant for chronically homeless individuals. It's meant as an intervention, and it's more for families that don't need that supportive services and wraparound services. And so it's really not a great fit for chronic. So we'd have to work with House of Refuge and within the region to figure out if we could use some of those dollars and that they could actually be eligible for it. And the second thing that we can do as a council and as a city is just keep this whole story relevant. Make sure that nobody forgets that we have a crisis on our hands and that we've got families that really need some alternative housing, and that it really is incumbent on us as a region to work together to figure out how to make this happen. So with that, we're here for any other questions or any comments that the council wants to offer or direction that you have for us at this time. Or if you would like to hear from House of Refuge, they're happy to come up and talk to you as well.
Great, thank you. I think there is perhaps a question or two from council, so let's see where this goes next. Mr. Richens?
Can you talk a little bit about the outreach that's been done to our federal congressional delegation in regards to this issue and where that stands? Thanks.
Mayor, Councilmember Richens, thanks for that question. We've got a lot. The city's received a tremendous response from our congressional delegation as we've reached out to them. Congresswoman Simmons' office and Congressman Salmon both have been engaged in this. In fact, the mayor has a phone call set up on Wednesday morning with Congresswoman Sinema to get an update on what her office has been able to find out dealing with what has happened here in the Phoenix area, but also nationally, how HUD has made this decision and has overruled the local planning agencies, the continuum of care on their funding recommendations. And that's been the big disappointment that we've heard from the congressional offices to this point, is that, as Natalie stated earlier, that these decisions were made without warning, that it overruled the local decision making that has been in place for years, and did this without any Plan B to help situations like House of Refuge, where not only was it immediate, but it was retroactive, and HUD has not yet, to this point, come to the table with any solutions on how to transition that. What we're hearing also, Councilmember Richens, is that we're trying to understand HUD's answer for why they've done this has been shifting. Who's to blame for this has been shifting, I should say. At first, on KJAS, I believe, they said that this was a MAG issue. This was the continuum of care that made this decision. But when the congressional offices were able to refute that by showing the actual submitted documentation and showing that the region had requested funding for these 8 programs, then HUD had to backtrack. And the latest we heard today through Congressman Salmon's office, Congressman Salmon's D.C. office, spoke with the congressional liaisons for HUD on Capitol Hill, and now their answer is they're blaming the House of Representatives Appropriations Committee for this decision. After we heard that excuse, frankly, we had our federal folks look into the actual budget language in the FY15 and FY16 federal budget to see if there was any language inserted that would have given HUD direction to do this, and we can't find any language anywhere that would have directed HUD funding towards permanent housing as opposed to transitional housing, or at least overruling the ability of the local communities to do that. So we're continuing to work with both of our members of Congress, and I know that there are others in the delegation that care as well. We've been reaching out to the Senate as well, but fortunately at this point we've got 2 members of Congress that represent Mesa who care very much about this issue and have their staff engaged.
What's the total amount for the 8 programs across Arizona that have been impacted by this? Do we know? Have a general ballpark?
Yeah, Mayor, Councilmember Richens, it's about $2.6 million for in MAG. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say throughout the state. I'm not sure if there's any others outside of Maricopa County, but in our region, it's about $2.6 million for those 8 programs, I believe.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Luna.
If we don't get the funding, when will these people have to leave their homes?
So right now, the House of Refuge has told us that they have enough funding to continue their program through the middle of June. So that's kind of where we're at. So they have already, as if I understand correctly, been served eviction notices. So they have residents right now who are already panicking and trying to figure out where they're going to go next.
Mr. Richens.
Yeah, who owns these houses?
House of Refuge does.
Mm-hmm.
They got
the allocation when the Air Force was giving it up.
they got them from the feds.
Right. So why? So I know we can't provide a program, but why are we making them leave?
Well, you have the funding.
Welcome, Nancy. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, please? So
My
everyone
name
knows
is
who you are.
Nancy Marion. I'm the executive director at House of Refuge, and thank you very much, Mayor Giles and Councilmember Thompson. I know we have created a lot of media storm around you, but I want you to know that that is only because our community understands the importance of House of Refuge and what it represents to the families that we care for. House of Refuge was issued the homes when the former Williams Air Force Base was decommissioned. And so the homes are actually part of a conveyance through the Department of Health and Human Services. But in order to run the transitional housing program, you have to have the funding for the support services and for the operational piece of the housing.
For example, the HUD grant paid for about $100,000 in utilities to keep the housing running. That's about half of the utilities that have to be paid for to keep the whole property going.
Great. Well, this is very troubling. I mean, the federal government's handling of this is just beyond disappointing. The way to address housing or homelessness is not to create homelessness. So I'm hoping that we'll have some listening ears. I do know that our congressional delegation is sincerely very engaged in this, and I appreciate. I mean, try to imagine somebody who would be more passionate about this than Kirsten Sinema. I mean, it's not. You're not going to find him, and Mr. Salmons has been equally dedicated to helping here. So I know that there is, I think, an opportunity to ask for an extension in the implementation of this. And so I think it's important that we draft a letter in support of that, indicating, expressing our concern and support for that extension. And then I know that everyone on this council is very supportive of working to continuing to encourage and support our congressional delegation in applying some pressure to HUD to implement this decision. I mean, you can disagree with the decision. And that's another debate. But the question of how this was implemented is not debatable. It was just couldn't have been implemented in a worse way. So we need people to understand that and to respond to that. I'm sorry, Mr. Kavanaugh.
And I just wanted to point out that we also have another Mesa-based organization that was significantly impacted at New Leaf. Is being cut by about $326,000 is what I recall approximately for their transitional living. So it is a decision that it's impacted agencies not only that are based in Mesa, but obviously throughout the county. And the timing of it and the retroactive nature of it is a challenge. For those of us who worked in the human services field, we knew this was coming. This has been it's not a surprise that the reallocation of funding to these other types of programs is something that Congress clearly expressed its preference for, and I think the agency was responding to it. So it's everybody's passing the buck right now. This is a buck that's been in play for a lot of years, and what the real problem is that I don't think anyone across the country expected a complete defunding at this point. Plus, with the timing and saying it's retroactive back to February 1, but this has been part of a national debate in housing really for about the past 4 years, and a lot of it has been directed from the House, and so there's blame all around. Thanks.
Yes, Mr. Thompson.
I know there's a meeting tomorrow night at House Refuge.
There is.
So I'm hoping that the community will come out and support you. The question that I would have too is there a transition plan right now? Have you started looking at or putting together a plan of how we're going to transition 77 families into permanent, semi-permanent housing?
There is we are discussing a transitional plan, but one of the the secondary barrier that we have is a lack of inventory for our residents. When I was pulling together some of the information, our residents pay 30% of their adjusted gross income, which is a national best practice number, and only 10% of our residents pay over $500 a month for rent and utilities. So only 10% of our residents may be hopeful, even if there was an inventory in the open market, that they could go out and find that. For the remaining 90%, we're discussing whether we go on waiting lists, whether we go in front of other people on waiting lists. This decision really has such a huge effect regionally that ripple effects of it are going to be felt for years to come.
Mr. Thompson.
Natalie, do we have vouchers available, or do we know if any of these folks are military and veterans?
I would imagine that there are some veterans.
I believe the number for last year was 4.
Yeah.
We had 4 veterans,
But,
veteran families.
But, good news or bad news at this point, our VASH vouchers have all been spoken for.
That's good.
So yeah, so 191 of our VASH vouchers have now been spoken for, yes.
Mr. Luna.
You're working through Macy United Way, and if community members want to respond and donate money to you, how do they do that?
Macy United Way has been very responsive to us. We've spoke with both Cynthia and Mark there, and one of the things that they suggested is that they might be able to help with rental deposits or with utility assistance. So I go back to the lack of affordable housing and that inventory, and that will be helpful for a certain number of our residents, but certainly not for all of them. So yes, we are. As for the funding, we're having a meeting tomorrow night at House of Refuge. That's at 6935 East Williamsfield Road, and we're hoping that we have a huge community support and that they come out, and we literally are telling them that for $30 a day they can fund a family for $900 a month. We've just broken it down to the most basic of numbers that families can wrap their heads around and hopefully come alongside us and help support us.
And Mayor, Councilmember Luna, I would just add too that Claudia Walters has been instrumental in kind of our outreach to the congressional delegation. She's been on the phone as much as anyone, communicating with the congressional offices and showing that this is broad-based support within the whole Mesa community. So Mesa United Way has really done a great job, not only on boots on the ground on trying to help on this, but to show the reach and the community support to our congressional delegation. I think is sending a strong message as well.
Mayor, if I may.
Sure.
You mentioned an extension, and the extensions that HUD has put out is based on if the grant has funding left to be able to extend the time frame under which it operates. House of Refuge has always expended all of their HUD funding and found other funding in the community to cover that. At this point, Arizona Behavioral Health Corporation has floated and will be floating about $300,000 to House of Refuge because there is no funding from HUD that appears to be coming at any point.
Okay. Well, talk is cheap. I mean, money needs to come to bear here to try to get by some time for these families. It is my understanding is that this program is about a $90,000 to $95,000 a month price tag attached to it.
Yes.
So even if the city stepped in and tried to help, we couldn't do that for very long at all.
And so that's one of the things that we want to address is that we know that this is not a replacement of funding. This is emergency funding so that we can have the time to find housing that is safe for our residents. So we know that this is a short-term approach to trying to take care of a long-term issue.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure this is not the last time we'll discuss this. So over the next, this is at the top of our agenda. I hope you know that. And so over the next few weeks, we'll talk a lot, but we'll also try to find some money to help alleviate the pressure out there. Thank you for the update. Council, any additional questions or, ladies and gentlemen, anything else you'd like to share with us on this? Okay. Thank you for the update.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You bet. Next item on our agenda, item 3, is to acknowledge receipt of the EDAB board minutes. Thank you. Motion and second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Thank you. Next is hear reports on meetings and conferences attended. Council, anything you'd like to share with us? Hearing none, moving on to the next item is scheduling of meetings and general information. Mr. Brady.
Yes, just to kind of go ahead and put it out there right now, Vice Mayor Kavanaugh, about this Friday, May 20th from 7:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. Will be a coffee with a council member at the Fiesta District Police Station. So we invite everybody to start putting that on their calendar. And our next study session will be Thursday, May 19th at 7:30 a.m. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there's nothing else, Council, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye. 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 We are adjourned, and we'll reconvene upstairs.